This video is brought to you by Sailrite. Visit sailrite.com for all your project supplies, tools, and instructions. Congratulations on the purchase of your Sailrite Fabricator Sewing Machine. If you're new to sewing or just simply not acquainted with the Sailrite Fabricator Sewing Machine, we recommend that you watch this quick tutorial of how to get started sewing with your brand new Sailrite Fabricator Sewing Machine. Let's go ahead and wind our first bobbin using the industrial bobbin winder. We're going to show you how to do that now. Rotate the balance wheel so the needle is just about to enter the feed dog and stop. You do not need to tilt the machine back to gain access to the bobbin case. You can do it from underneath the end of the tabletop as seen here. To remove the bobbin case, lift the spring-loaded lever and pull the bobbin case out. The industrial thread stand takes 2 cones of thread. We'll use one to wind the bobbin. Pass the end of the thread through the guide as shown. Pass the thread from the thread stand to the back end of the bobbin winder. Pull the thread through the hole near the thread tensioner and then behind and under, pulling the thread between the discs of the tensioner. Release the lever of the bobbin case and the bobbin will come out. Hold the lever and it's locked in place. With the bobbin removed, we want to push that bobbin on the spindle of the bobbin winder all the way to the base of the winder. If this is the first time you've used the industrial bobbin winder and you find the bobbin does not fit snugly on the split post, you can insert a screwdriver between the center of the post and pry the 2 halves apart slightly. Then test the bobbin to be sure it fits snugly in place without easily rolling. If the posts are too spread apart, it may be very difficult to push the bobbin onto the spindle. If that is the case, remove the bobbin and take a pair of pliers and pinch the 2 halves of the post slightly together. Then reinstall the bobbin and see if it fits snugly enough not to spin on its own, but yet easily enough to install and remove. Once this operation is done, you'll never have to do it again. Bring the thread forward to the bobbin and push the thread tail through one of the holes in the bobbin from the inside. Push the bobbin winder lever forward to move the wheel against the drive belt of the sewing machine. Pull the posi pin from the balance wheel and place it in the center keeper. This way you can wind the bobbins without the sewing machine running. Hold the thread tail and power the machine to start winding the bobbin. After several revolutions, you can cut the thread flush with the side of the bobbin, or just continue to hold onto the tail until the thread breaks, as it did here. If this is the first time you've wound a bobbin, you'll probably need to adjust it. What we want the bobbin to be filled to about 80% capacity, and this screw adjusts the finger that disengages the wheel from the belt. So we're trying to find the optimal fill location, so you may have to make several adjustments, but once it's made, it'll be set for life. After several adjustments, this is perfect. If the wound bobbin is not filling evenly on the left or the right, you can loosen this screw and move this device left or right to fill it more evenly. Do not overfill the bobbin, as the thread may jam in the bobbin case. Fill it to about 80% of the bobbin's outer diameter. Now we can remove the posi pin from the keeper and install it in the balance wheel and rotate the balance wheel down and towards you until it falls into the hole on the bushing. Insert the wound bobbin into the bobbin case. The thread tail should remain outside of the case and be passed through the slot in the side of the case. Pull the thread under the tension spring. As you're holding the case with a view of the bobbin should turn clockwise when pulling on the thread tail. If not, take the bobbin out and flip it over. To install the bobbin case, lift and hold the spring-loaded lever and push the case into the axle of the shuttle assembly. The position of the bobbin case should be installed as shown, noting the directional position of the nub in the appropriate cutout, as seen here. Did you know that you can also wind bobbins while you're sewing? Here we are sewing a scrap piece of fabric, and notice to the right there, I'm holding the tail of thread and winding a bobbin. I'll cut that tail off, and now that the bobbin is semi-wound, I can continue to sew as the bobbin fills. This is a quick way to always ensure that a bobbin is ready for use. Threading your Sailrite Fabricator sewing machine is next. Use the knee lever to lift the presser foot and use the foot lock lever and back to keep it up. Place a cone of thread on the thread stand, leading the thread up to the guide above the thread cone as shown. Now pass the thread through the far right hole of the 3-hole thread guide, then up over the top and through the leftmost hole. Then through the topmost hole of the guide. Bring the thread around the front, then through the bottom hole of the guide. Pull the thread over the top and between the tension discs, then down through the bottom hole. Now pass the thread around and between the tension discs. This is most easily done with the presser foot up so the discs come apart. Pass it around it in a clockwise motion. Lift the thread up slightly so it gets caught on the hook of the take-up spring, as shown here. Pass the thread under the thread guide. Lead the thread upwards through the elongated thread finger and then through the take-up arm from right to left. Now run the thread down through the thread finger here and the one right above the needle here at the bottom. Once it's through that, then run the thread through the hole of the thread guide on the needle bar, as shown here. Pass the thread from left to right through the eye of the needle, and draw the thread about 8 inches through that needle eye. If not done so already, lift the presser foot. In one hand, hold the thread loosely to the right. Now grab hold of the balance wheel and rotate it towards you and down. Continue to rotate the wheel until the needle is once again in its highest position up. Pull on the needle thread and the bobbin thread below will be drawn up through the needle plate. You can use a small instrument to slide under the presser feet to pull both threads outward. The needle thread should be through the inner presser foot when complete. Up next, let's sew a little bit. The presser feet are currently locked. We're going to push our knee lever to the right and then release the foot lift lock in the back. Now we'll move our leg to the left to disengage the knee lift, and the presser foot is down and we can sew. Never sew with the presser foot up. It can cause jams. The stitch length can be changed from 0 millimeters to 8 millimeters. To change the stitch length, press down on the reverse lever, then press on the tab labeled push, then rotate the dial to the desired stitch length, then release the push tab and the reverse lever. To sew in reverse, press the lever down fully. Forward movement is automatically restored when the lever is released. To remove fabric from underneath the presser foot, stop the machine with the needle at its upward-most position or rotate the balance wheel until it is. When the take-up arm is traveling up and at the highest position up, lift the presser foot with the knee lever and pull your fabric out. With the presser foot down, the tension discs are tight, as you can see here. Lift the presser foot with the knee lever and you'll notice the tension discs release, so it's easy to pull the fabric out. If you don't pay attention to how high the needle came up to remove your fabric after you lift your presser foot, sometimes it's helpful to rock the balance wheel back and forth to free the thread from the tension assembly and the rotary hook. Next up, we're going to concentrate on adjusting thread tension. We're going to release the upper tension several revolutions so there's almost no upper tension. Now we're going to sew an inch or so and then give it one full revolution. Sew another inch and repeat that process several times. There are almost 14 full revolutions of the tension assembly, and each revolution will change the tension slightly. And we're going to inspect the stitch in this 4-layer canvas assembly with V92 thread and a size number 20 needle and show you the variance of stitch quality based on the amount of upper tension that's applied. Here at our final stitch, we're going to stop turning the tension assembly. This is a lot of tension, so we're going to reverse that knob back to almost the normal position, which is about here. Now let's pull this fabric assembly out and inspect our stitches. At the end we had a maximum amount of tension, and you can see the knot is actually on the top side of the fabric. That's way too much tension, but here it looks pretty good. Then at the beginning on the top side it actually looks fairly good, but if you turn the assembly over and look at the underside, you can see at the beginning the knots on the underside. This is too little tension. But as we continue to move down this stitch, you'll notice that the knots become more buried in the fabric. When you're setting upper tension, you want to first set tension with too little tension and then slowly increase the upper tension to the point that the knots just disappear on the bottom side of the fabric. Tension changes to the bobbin thread should only be made when upper tension changes alone do not solve stitch tension problems. In general, bobbin tension requires just about a 2-ounce drag on the thread, similar to what it feels like when you pull dental floss from its container. To change the tension on the bobbin, adjust this screw. Turning the screw counterclockwise releases tension, while clockwise increases it. In most situations, adjusting bobbin tension is not usually required. We'll now have a short discussion on thread and needle combinations.
Sailrite has created a PDF that recommends the appropriate needle and thread size, but if you scroll down a little bit further, it also recommends the appropriate thread and needle size for each brand of fabric. So it's a very useful tool. If you'd like to see it, click that icon at the top right.
This chapter will cover how to replace a needle appropriately in your Sailrite Fabricator Sewing Machine. To remove a needle, turn the balance wheel so the needle is at its highest position up. Then loosen the needle set screw and remove the old needle by pulling it downward. These are industrial needles, and they have no flat side to the shaft at the top, but they do have a scarf on the side as seen here. And that scarf on the Sailrite Fabricator Sewing Machine must point to the right as you face the sewing machine. Here we're going to insert a brand new needle into the needle bar by pushing it up so that it comes up against the stop position. You can see it through the hole in the side of the needle bar here. When it's all the way up, and when the scarf is facing all the way to the right as you face the sewing machine, as you can see here, then you can set that screw down hard on the needle, holding it in place in the needle bar. If the needle is not inserted all the way up, and if the scarf is crooked or not facing in the right direction, in other words directly to the right as seen here, your sewing machine will not sew correctly. Tips on sewing light fabrics is next. Did you know that you can sew with very light home sewing machine thread with the Sailrite Fabricator Sewing Machine? When using a spool like this, run the thread from the side of the spool and directly towards the sewing machine. Do not run it up through the thread guide above the thread stand. The thread should come off the spool so it's almost directly in line with the top of the sewing machine. It doesn't have to be exact. To do that, you may want to release this screw and lower this holder bracket, but don't lower it too much, otherwise when you tilt the sewing machine back it may hit it. When using home sewing machine thread, be sure to replace the needle to match the thread size. Too large needles will cause many sewing problems. And you may need to apply a little bit of tension to the bobbin case. We want about a 2-ounce drag on the thread, and this is a very fine thread, so I'm increasing the tension on the bobbin case slightly. Now regarding the upper tension, when sewing very fine threads, it is important to release the upper tension several revolutions, almost so that there's very little tension at all from the upper tension assembly. And in most situations with a thread like this, stitch length is reduced to around 3 or so millimeters in length. And always do some testing in the light fabric that you will be sewing to check to be sure that the tension is set appropriately. Here there are a little bit too many wrinkles in the fabric, so I'm going to release the upper tension by 1 full revolution and sew through this light material, 2 layers of a light material, and check. Again, I'm checking the knots on the bottom side to make sure that they are just on the bottom side or just pulled into the fabric slightly, and to try to reduce the wrinkling of the fabric. And by releasing the upper tension, I can basically reduce puckering of the fabric to 0 and still have that stitch look great on both the top side and the bottom side. When sewing light fabrics, too much foot pressure can also cause puckering. If that's the case, you may want to release some of the foot pressure with the silver knob here and the black knob. The silver knob controls the outer presser feet and the black one controls the center presser foot. We'll now cover lubricating of the Sailrite Fabricator Sewing Machine. The Sailrite Fabricator Sewing Machine has an auto lube pump. The oil tray needs to be filled to the high-low level marks, as you can see here. This is the pump. The flow of oil through this pump can be adjusted. Loosen this screw. To increase oil flow, close the clearance of the adjusting plate over the oil hole. This increases vacuum pressure. To decrease the oil flow, open up the hole slightly by moving the finger away from that hole. You can also control the amount of oil getting to the rotary hook. There is a screw here. If you turn it clockwise, that increases oil to the hook. If you turn it counterclockwise, that decreases oil going to the hook. Please do not cut the strings. They're meant to distribute oil throughout the machine. Now let's cover some of the manual oiling spots that are required. Here at the top of the sewing machine there are rubber caps. You'll need to remove those caps periodically and place a few drops of oil within those cavities. When should manual oiling be done? Well, about after every 8 hours of continuous use. Then reinsert those plugs again. There are some locations underneath the side plate, so we're going to remove the side plate. Put a drop of oil on anything that looks like a gear, cam, or a slide. You will not hurt the machine in doing this. We're actually going to spend the time here to show everywhere that we believe a drop of oil should be placed. If you feel like you can figure this out for yourself, you can skip ahead to the next chapter. Once you're done oiling, clean up any oil residue and run some scrap fabric through to make sure that all the oil is not dripping onto your project. If you have problems sewing or skip stitches, you may need to check timing. This chapter will cover it. We're going to remove the end cover so that we can set needle bar height. It's the first step of timing of the Sailrite Fabricator Sewing Machine. Always start with a brand new size number 20 needle when setting timing. Set the stitch length indicator to its lowest setting by pressing the push tab and rotating the dial towards 1 millimeter. The reverse lever will barely move up and down at this position. Lift the presser foot with your knee and then lock it in place with the locking lever and back. Tilt the sewing machine back and then rotate the balance wheel until the needle is at the bottom of its stroke before it comes up. Right there. So now the needle is at its lowest position down before coming up. You can see the needle bar clamp, and it can be loosened, and then the needle bar can be raised or lowered. What we want is we want to adjust the height of the needle bar so that the top of the bobbin is at the center of the eye of a number 20 needle. So now that that screw has been loosened, you can see I can lift and lower the needle bar. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pay close attention here to make sure that the top of the bobbin is at the center of that needle eye, as seen here. Now be careful you don't rotate the needle bar. We really want the needle bar to be in the same position that it was before we loosened the needle bar clamp. Once you're happy with it, be sure to lock that set screw down hard again so it doesn't slip. We'll check it out one more time to make sure it looks right, and it does, and now we can lower the sewing machine back into the tabletop. Now that the needle bar is set appropriately, we're going to concentrate on the machine's timing. To do this, we're going to remove the needle plate. We've already removed the side plate. Then we'll remove the 2 set screws holding the feed dog in place and remove it. We already set the machine stitch length to absolute 0 when we set the needle bar height. We need to keep it there. We're going to set our calipers to 2.5 millimeters. Then we're going to mark some cardstock so we can use that as a reference for setting timing. Rotate the balance wheel until the needle is at the bottom of its stroke all the way down before coming up. With a fine point Sharpie marker, hold the paper up to where the needle bar meets the machine casting and make a mark on the needle bar at the 2.5 millimeter location. Rotate the balance wheel until the mark lines up with the machine casting, right about there. The point of the rotary hook should be lined up with the vertical center line of the needle, and here you can see it is not. It is out of timing. To adjust, rotate the balance wheel and loosen each of the 3 screws holding the hook in place. I prefer to loosen 2 of the set screws and to leave one of the set screws that's closest from across the point of the hook tight until I get the needle bar set at the 2.5 millimeter setting. This one I leave tight until I have the needle bar set at my mark. So here I'm going to set the needle bar at that mark again. There we go. Now I can loosen the last of the 3 screws, leaving my screwdriver in the head of the screw, and use my fingers to position the point of the hook at the center line of the needle and keep it about 0.5 millimeters away from the needle left and right. So I'm making fine-tune adjustments with my finger until I have the point of the hook at the center line and about 0.5 millimeter gap between the hook and the needle, as seen here. When it looks like this, it's time to set each one of those set screws down hard. So I'm going to roll the balance wheel around to gain access to each one of the set screws and lock them down firmly. After checking twice that they're locked down hard, we're going to check the timing one more time to make sure that we've done it appropriately. Yep, it looks good. Now I'll reinstall the feed dog. What I like to do is to start the 2 screws for the feed dog and leave it semi-loose. Then install the needle plate and tighten down the screws for it, and then come back to the feed dog screws, making sure the feed dog is centered in the rectangular opening, and lock down its screws. So after the needle plate is installed and the screws are tight, I'll make sure that the feed dog is centered in that opening from left to right and tighten down its screws. Now everything else can be set back into position. I'm going to change my stitch length, and I'm going to put on the side plate and the end cover. And our sewing machine is now timed appropriately. Last thing to do is to check to make sure that it sews well, and I like to rotate the balance wheel by hand to sew my first few stitches to make sure that everything is working. Then I'll sew under power. If there are no skip stitches and everything seems to be performing well, you did a great job. We hope this tutorial video has been helpful with your brand new Sailrite Fabricator Sewing Machine, and hopefully you're ready to sew. If you have any questions or comments, please be sure to contact Sailrite. We're glad to help. I'm Eric Grant, and from all of us here at Sailrite, thanks for watching.